Okay, I'll get this situated eventually. This is my first video blog that I'm gonna do. I was kind of inspired. You ever? Do you ever get? Have you ever been in a situation? Well, geez, have you ever had a relationship where when it ends, you just feel like rising above everything, so that person can see who you really are? Because they just didn't seem to get you. There's that connection between you two, and then it just doesn't work out because she feels like you're something else, and it's just like, you're frustrated. That's what I'm kind of going through. That's what I'm dealing with today. And the thought that I had was, I've been wanting to do a video series for a long time on just my studies of the Bible. A lot of people do them. A lot of people do vlogs on here, and I thought I would give it a shot. I just want to talk about I don't even know where to start, to be honest with you. But this is something I've wanted to do for years and years and years, and I don't know why I didn't. I do video. I've done it for 10 years, so I've had the ability. I've held myself back. I guess probably lack of confidence a little bit, maybe, possibly. So I think the whole purpose of what I want to talk about, though, is to kind of say, hey, look, really, it's hard to start at one place because there's so much to say, but I think a lot of the times, well, let's start with my recent ex. She believed I was a Satanist. I'm not a Satanist. I actually believe in the Bible. It's just that I believe that it's been watered down and interpreted incorrectly over the years, and so it's led to where we are today with so much division. There are so many thousands of different Christian denominations, and I think there's an explanation for all of it. A lot of it has to do with the roots, and then a lot of it has to do with the Protestant movement, and then just simply the various Great Awakenings of just various views that are coming out over the years, especially. Let's see. Let's start with. I think the most important thing would be Jesus. With Christians, see, this is where I become a Satanist to her because, it's the music I listen to, so. But just my views on the Bible. But she doesn't believe that I believe in Jesus because I don't necessarily agree with how people view who he was. I think a lot of what people see today has come down to us through, it's been passed down through the years, and its source was from more of a political source, and they needed control over what you needed to see in order to create their religion. They basically hijacked the original and then kind of conformed it to their own political style. In fact, if you look at like the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church next to the earlier Roman religions, they simply just transferred the titles. They didn't really. They renamed the titles. All those positions maintained the same. The nobility remained the same, and they just became cardinals and whatever. Anyway, about Jesus, they passed that down. They needed a God figure, and so they had to. That kind of explains why Jesus is missing a lot of his life too. Is this God figure that they had to create? But if you start in Deuteronomy 17:14 of the Old Testament, now I've asked a lot of Christians over the years, what are your thoughts on this? And it's about the promised king. When they come into Israel, when the Israelites come into Israel, into the land, they'll want to set a king, and God describes what kind of king they would have. And one of the things that stands out to me is that it mentions he would not have many wives, suggesting that this king would be married. You see the story later. It picks up later when they actually go into the land in the book of Samuel. They go to Samuel and they say, place a king over us. And that's kind of where the rift begins, because they didn't ask God, they asked Samuel, and even Samuel goes to God and he's upset about it. And God says, this is with me. And then he describes a new king. Since they did not come to me for a king, they will have a new king placed over them. And they describe him, he's described as being authoritative, like dictator style, or he squanders the wealth to himself and that sort of thing. And so there's two different archetypes for kingship demonstrated in the Bible. And the first one never came. The first one that was given had never come into play, because when they actually went to fulfill it, they were prescribed a new king because they didn't go to God. So, and that's in I don't remember. It's Samuel 8, I believe. 1 Samuel 8, and where this leads to, I believe, when you read Matthew, I think it's chapter 3. I probably should have all this stuff in front of me. I just picked up the camera and started going because I didn't really prep for this. I've got a book I'm writing on it. I could probably look through it and get the information. But the king or in Matthew, he talks about how I called my son out of Egypt, and a lot of Christians believe that was a quote from a prophet speaking about the future. Actually, when you go to Hosea 11:1, it talks about I called my son Israel out of Egypt. It was talking about Israel. It wasn't referring to the future, and that's a big misconception among Christians. Now, it's not an issue though, because what it's doing is it's referring to the past. But remember, in the past, that king never came. The promised king never came out. So in a sense, he was fulfilling that when he came out of Egypt. He finally, 1,500 years later or so, finally emerged out of Egypt. That's why he said that, and that's how he's quoting the prophet Hosea in 11:1. So you kind of have that connect. It's an interesting connection. So that's kind of an idea of where you could start looking at as to who Jesus really was. Jesus was not... I don't want to start off by saying Jesus was not a God, because right already I understand that would throw up a lot of red flags. But if you look at the past and look at what the promise was, you start to see that he's not. In fact, he wouldn't be. That's why they took away a lot of stories about his life and watered them down. There's a suggestion that Mary Magdalene was actually his wife, but they don't want you to believe that necessarily because that takes away from his deity. So there's a lot more to get into. We'll get in. I'll talk about one more thing and then I'll quit this video and I'll make another one. I'm new to this, so I'm just kind of figuring this out. If people respond to this well, then I'll make more. So the last thing I want to say about his character was that what would he have been? Well, he would have followed the Torah. He would have taught the Torah that was given to Moses. That's what it says about the promised king. He would read the Torah aloud to the people. So he would be a keeper of Torah. Another thing that I would suggest, and it kind of gets into some other stuff about Nazareth, the city of Nazareth. He also most likely would have been set apart. Now in the Old Testament there's a law of the Nazarite, and basically that describes what Samson was. Samson did not cut his hair. He did not drink alcohol. That's the law of the Nazarite, was that you abstain from alcohol. You did not cut your hair. There were restrictions on your beard, how you cut it. So in my opinion, I don't think there's anything that states this, but that would have been something he would have done, because you set yourself apart from God, and that's what he would have demonstrated to the people. That's what the king would demonstrate to the people. He would have been a Nazarite. Now there's a suggestion in scholarly fields, secular, whatever you want to call it, that says that there was no city of Nazareth. Now, I don't see a problem with that. They say that disproves Jesus, blah blah blah. I don't actually see an issue with that, because there could be two possibilities why that even existed. And I bring up the second one because it actually comes from another source. This is something that I looked up to kind of look into what I had discovered for myself, and that's what I think. What my opinion on it was that Nazareth was actually the city of Nazareth was actually the city of Nazarites. The other source goes on to say that they were actually Essenes, which that's quite possible. Either way, the city of Nazareth was actually referring to the city of the Nazarites or the city of the Essenes. It wasn't referring to an actual city called Nazareth. In fact, this source, the second source, says that the Nazarenes were referring, in fact, to the northern Essenes. So there's some if you look at like the Greek for Nazareth or Nazarene, if you look at the root, it says that the root has an unknown origin, but the root is nazara. And if you compare that to the root of Nazarite, Nazarite is nazar. So there's a close similarity there. And according to the Strong's Concordance, Nazarah, the root is unknown, like where it came from. And my thought is, well, it's borrowed from the Hebrew and made Greek. Now, the other source goes on to say that if you go to the Hebrew of Nazareth or Nazarene, it's nazar. It's netzer. It's actually a different base spelling. So that creates a difference in what you might think the actual meaning was. I'm not going to contest that because I don't know for sure, but I'll say that if the Bible was originally written in Greek and then they go back to the Hebrew, that might create an issue with the word that's created to represent Nazarene, which would have been netzer. So that kind of disconnects from that timeline of usage of the word. That's just my opinion. I don't know if it's even true. But either way, there is an explanation as to why the city of Nazareth does not exist. And there are a lot of things that you look at that you'll see people contesting, and there's usually an explanation for it and why they're wrong. So you get this compounding negative attitude towards Christianity based on all these ideas, and people say it's not real. Well, you're wrong here, 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 and eventually your whole foundation dissolves from underneath you and you don't have an argument. So I'm not discounting a lot of the arguments that atheists or others have against Christianity. Some of them they're right, and the Christians are wrong, and there's not a problem with that. There's a way to reconcile that, and it doesn't take away from the validity. It's just that an atheist happened to catch something that the Christians didn't, because there are a lot of things in the Bible that have been misinterpreted over the centuries. So you're going to see that. You're going to see a lot of opportunity to point out discrepancies. So anyway, I guess the point of this whole video, my first video, was about the original nature of who Jesus probably would have been. I don't know if I went into depth. If anybody has any questions or anything, I can always create another video. I want to make this a more constant thing. So I started writing a book. I kind of got stuck on it, so I thought I would talk about concepts. I've even thought about doing a blog where you can read my information, because again, I have a book and I have a lot of information. It's not fluid yet. So tell me what you think.